Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session. My name is John Winford. I'm a senior manager on the database services team, and I'm joined by Mac Agashi. Mac?
Hello, everybody. My name is Mac Agashi. I'm the engineering manager for DMA. My team consists of solution architects, SDs, and database developers who do assessments and conversions of customer workloads.
Yeah, so here today we're to speak on the Amazon Database Migration Accelerator. As Mac already alluded to, we call that one Amazon DMA. So let's jump into it and start talking about the product. We'll kick off with a bit of a high-level overview to make it easy to understand what DMA is all about before we jump into some of the details. So yeah, Mac, why don't you start us off? What is Amazon DMA?
DMA, which stands for Database Migration Accelerator, we convert customers' workloads, on-premise workloads to cloud, to AWS. Here in the picture, you see on the left-hand side, the source servers such as Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server, an application which is a Java and .NET application. Combined these two things, we call it a workload. And the accelerator converts these, both the database and the application, and the final output is either a Postgres or MySQL server or Amazon Aurora and a refactored application.
Yeah, so behind the scenes, Amazon DMA, really what we're offering is a team of AWS conversion experts to leverage the same tools that you have access to yourself as a customer. We use the AWS Database Migration Service to migrate the data, and the AWS Schema conversion tool to convert the database schema and application code. But really, the secret sauce, if you will, that we're bringing here is this team of absolute gurus that can really help with the conversion from what we call a legacy commercial database to a cloud native or open source engine. As a customer, what do you need? Essentially, it's just good to have a familiarity of what the key features of AWS database services are, so you know what you're getting into. And we're more than happy to help enable you on what those are, train you up on them through some other programs outside of Amazon DMA. But really, you should kind of know what are the open source engines going to get you, the flexibility, the low cost, the features of a fully managed service of something like Amazon RDS. These are all things that Amazon DMA can help you realize as a customer or as an individual business. So what's involved in migrating an application? Mac, why don't you give everyone a bit of an overview of the different stages of a migration?
Yeah, the different stages, we initially start off with the assessment of the application to understand what kind of workload it is. And after analyzing the application, when the conversion process starts, starting with the migrating the schema itself, and then migrating the code, database code, as well as the application code. And along the way, we do quality assurance, running unit tests and other functional tests to verify that whatever we are converting is correct, and then we can produce the same output as before. And as the conversion ends, towards the very end, we once again run user acceptance tests to confirm that everything works as expected for the customer. After this is done, all the refactoring work is done, and then comes the part of moving the workload into production. And there are the two parts. One is the actual data migration itself, and then the production cutover.
One thing I always find quite interesting looking at this graph is just the percentage breakdowns. People think that the hardest part of doing the conversion, the bit that takes the most time, is doing all that technical work going from, say, a SQL Server schema to a Postgres schema. But the reality of it is, when you look at it, you've got 8% of the effort in the schema migration. Testing and validation, that's what takes some of the big time chunks in there. Making sure that the work is actually done and done right. That there's some effort there, but DMA, where it can help out, is really accelerate you on your migration journey. We'll cover all the bits in blue there and run some of those user acceptance tests as well, just to validate that things are right. But in case anyone's wondering where these percentages came from, Amazon, we've been migrating databases for years, and this is just generally speaking the effort breakdown in a percentage that we've seen from all of our migration engagements. Your mileage may vary, but irrespective of that, DMA can really help accelerate you in your migration by covering all of those bits in blue that you see on the screen. So Amazon DMA process, Mac, why don't you talk about where we're at here on this slide?
Yeah, so going a bit deeper here, we initially asked the customer for providing us an SCT report as well as the application code and the source databases. And we do work in a sandbox environment. It's a non-prod environment that's set up in AWS. We do all the conversion work there, and we run the customer acceptance test and make sure that the results at the end are same as the results in the beginning on the source system. And after all of that is done, we return a refactored application as well as the database to the customer. We walk through and explain to the customer all the code changes that we have made so that you can make those and you can actually evolve the application and the database for your future needs. And we explain how the test output is and so on.
I got to say the workflow is really interesting. We can bring in that expertise to make it easy to help do the migration. But the point I always like to zero in on this slide is the fact that it says decreased risk, time, and effort. The decreased risk is a big one. It's very neat to hear in a marketing pitch, oh, you can move your legacy app that you've been working on for the past 15 years easily to open source. The sales will come in there and snap their fingers and make it seem like it's something that can be done instantly. Converting and migrating an application, it's always going to be a work effort. But what DMA does is it really decreases the risk and, of course, the time and the effort required for you to do it. We've got this great group of people that are absolute gurus at doing this sort of conversion work. And essentially what it does is it removes the risk from your company, from doing this migration, and just leverages their expertise to get it done. And if it wasn't abundantly clear here, we're covering the whole stack, the database as well as the application or applications using that database. That's what DMA offers to you as its benefit as a customer. So what are some of the key features of DMA, Mac?
Yeah, so there are three main value propositions here. First of all, we do conversions at a fixed price based on certain categorization that we do. And not only that, we also invoice the customer after the project is completed. So in that sense, when John was talking about earlier about de-risking the customer, that's what it means. If for any reason we could not do the conversion, then we would not invoice the customer. And the last thing I want to explain is also we have learned a lot of things about migrations over the last few years as we did internal Amazon migration as well as customer migrations. And based on that, we've developed a lot of internal capabilities, documents, knowledge repositories, etc. And we bring all of that expertise in the conversions that we do for customers in the future. And that's the final expertise, the final value proposition that DMA offers.
Yeah, I want to zero in on the pricing thing. Not to sound like the salesman here, because I'm really a technical guy, prefers to get into the weeds on converting the schemas and what have you. But we are being very clear and forthright in that it's a fixed price engagement. It's not like you go in and somebody gets their foot in the door and says, oh, look, it'll only be $5.99, and you walk out of there and you've ended up paying $10 for something. It's fixed price. The price you see is the price you pay. It is not milestone based. You don't have some sort of sketchy milestone setup where you basically get invoiced for 95% of the bill and they've only done 5% of the work. It's fixed price and you pay when we deliver, and you're good to go. So it really is all about de-risking, both from an expertise perspective as well as from a pricing perspective. We really do make it easy to move to open source engines. All right, so let's dive into and see some of the what a workload is and how we talk about a breakdown of what makes a DMA deliverable, if you will. So Mac, why don't you take this one off, because you get into the weeds a fair bit more on this. What is a workload from our perspective?
Yeah, we define workload in terms of functionality that the end user gets. So to get that functionality, you need a database, you need an application, you need the glue between them. And so when we talk about conversions, we talk about taking that entire system and migrating it. So that's what a workload means. It's a combination of database schema, database code, application code, as well as the tests that are used for verification. That's what is considered a workload. And there are different types of workloads that are being accepted. Mainly, it's custom applications that the customer has developed, and they have access to the code so that we can modify it. That's the main criteria. But if there are things where their customers are running out of the box applications, then we will not be able to convert it. So that sort of workload would not be something that would qualify for a DMA. And to begin with, we've launched DMA with certain databases, such as SQL Server and Oracle as the source. And we are supporting certain target databases, such as PostgreSQL, MySQL running as RDS or natively with Amazon Aurora. And over time, we will add other kinds of workloads also to support other data access patterns.
Yeah, it makes sense. Just to reiterate what Mac was saying there, we tend to focus in on custom or in-house built applications. If you bring to us your packaged app that the vendor has certified only to run against, say, Oracle database, we can't swap that database engine out. If the vendor is only certified it to run against Oracle, your best path there is to, either go back to the vendor and see if they happen to support open source, or look at possibly another application. But really, DMA is targeted towards those in-house or custom-built applications that you have access to and control of the source code. We'll happily work with you to get those ones converted to a native Amazon or open source engine. So let's talk about the categorization. We're not going to do just anything. If you've got some real curly application that you've had 10,000 developers working on for the last 5 years, that's maybe not going to be an appropriate workload for DMA. For us, as I said, we're clearly offering you fixed price, defined timeline migrations using teams of Amazon experts. But there's some qualification criteria outside of what Mac mentioned earlier about just Oracle or SQL Server workloads. Mac, do you want to talk about the three different categories we use when we're looking at possible workloads for DMA?
Sure, yeah. So in the first category, we are taking workloads that are basically straight ODBC, JDBC kind of workloads. We also consider applications that have been written using simple ORM frameworks. Typically, in this category, we are looking at 50 or so custom stored procedures, and they're relatively simple stored procedures. The next category is more complex, so we are looking at much more code, such as up to 200 stored procedures, usage of certain advanced language features, and things like that. On the database side, still somewhat moderate, I would say. The schemas, reasonable number of tables and views, and no user-defined data types. And category 3 is the most complex category that we are considering. So these are much more complex than category 2. There's more business logic in the stored procedures, potentially tens of thousands of lines of code in the procedures and functions, and usage of certain advanced engine-specific features.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So we've actually got two more categories above it. We've got a category 4 and a category 5. But just so everyone knows, category 5, those are the packaged applications I was mentioning. The vendors certified them to work only against whatever database it was, and there's really no option there. So category 5 is, for all intents and purposes, a not applicable for conversion. Category 4, we'll talk about that a little bit later on, what some of the options are for getting those workloads migrated when DMA isn't going to be the best fit for those. But before we get to that, maybe we should talk about the assessment process. This is where we kick things off. We don't want to go into things blindly. We don't want to make promises we can't keep, and we want to make sure that you understand what it is we're going to deliver. So, Mac, let's jump in and maybe give them a bit of an overview about how the DMA assessment process works.
Yeah, for DMA assessments, we look at three different artifacts. One artifact is an SCT assessment report. The other one is the database code, and the third one is application code. We ask the customer to run the SCT tool, which produces certain output, CSV output and PDF output. We look at the CSV files, and based on that, figure out, okay, how many objects are there, how much of it can be converted automatically, etc. Then there are certain issues that are flagged in the SCT report for which we need to go deeper and look at the database code itself. So we do manual review of the database code, and then that completes the database side of the assessment. And the next part is then we ask the customer to provide us with the application code, with Java code, .NET code, etc. We have some internal scripts where they extract certain metadata about the application, and so we use that for scoping the work. And then we also do manual code reviews of the application code.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So, I guess really where we kick things off in that assessment is we spend some time and we want to understand the application, how it all hangs together. The graphic you see on the right is just a sample. Like your application could have a couple different databases, or maybe you've got a single .NET application, and then also maybe a reporting service that connects into it. We just spend a bit of time to understand how things hang together so we can make a good assessment and come up with the best estimate as to what it's going to take to get this workload migrated. So we start off there. So yeah, the first step that we're going to do is ask you to run, or maybe we'll help you run what we call a schema conversion tool assessment report. So that's what we're referring to with SCT. Mac, do you want to talk a little bit about the SCT report and the information that it tells us?
Yes, sure. So there are two reports that you see on the slide. The left side is showing database code objects, such as procedures, functions, packages, etc. And on the right side, you will see storage objects, so tables, indexes, and so on. And then you will see some color coding there, which is showing which of these objects can be converted automatically and what percentage cannot be converted automatically. But that's also broken down further into what could be simple, what could be medium, and so on. And we'll talk about a little bit more of this in some future slides.
Yeah, so when you've got the SCT report, it gives us a high-level overview about how much effort it's really going to take to get the conversion to be done. There's work that'll have to be done by database experts to get it all to green, if you will. As you go into it and you start diving into the schema conversion, you can actually go into each individual item and see either stuff that gets converted automatically, or perhaps a recommendation about what you might do should you need to convert it manually. So for each item that's discovered by SCT, it provides you further details as to the problem and the actions that should be followed to resolve it. And this is the stuff this is where DMA comes in. There's some complexity to database conversion, and the DMA experts are here to help you. So let's go over and talk a little bit more about how database application code is assessed. Mac, do you want to go through this one?
Yeah, we have created a secure file sharing process for customers to share us this code. Once we receive it, then we start looking at, we have some internal scripts and tools which we run against the database code as well as app code, and that gives us metadata about the code base. And we use that. We also do architectural analysis and manual reviews to then do our assessment. And we'll talk a little bit more. You'll see a couple more reports on future slides.
Yeah, so I guess when it's all said and done, you've got a holistic analysis, as it says at the bottom. You've got the full picture view of the workload that we're potentially going to migrate with DMA. And in the end, the DMA team is going to provide you a DMA assessment report. All of this results in this report. It's very detailed. and allows you and your account team to decide the best way forward. Yeah, so now that we've got the assessment report, very detailed collection of information that helps customers make a good judgment call on the complexity of their database, and also for the DMA team to get an understanding as well. Mac, why don't you tell the audience just what this section is that we're looking here for the database component?
Yeah, this slide has three tables and it's showing some information about the database. So let me start with the first table on the left-hand side. It is showing different categories of objects, whether they can be automatically converted, and if it's manual, what's the complexity of those objects. So if we go down this table somewhere towards the middle or the bottom half, you'll see package function, for instance, or sorry, let's look at package procedure. You'll see 456 objects, and of which 337 are automatically converted. So that leaves us with 119 that are manual. Now, if you go to the table on the right-hand side, bottom, let's look at package procedure row once again, and you'll see the same number, 119. So this table is listing objects that have issues. So there are 119 package procedure objects with issues. And the following table, the following column shows you that there are 584 total issues across these package procedure objects. But then the final table on that image shows you that there are 30 distinct issues per type. So that means that we have to devise 30 different solutions, but then we have to implement them also and then replicate those across all of the 584 objects. So we use this information this manner to estimate the effort and complexity. And then the last table is the small table above it on the top right hand side, which just gives a verbal description of the issues, their complexity and the counts and the distinct objects.
So overall, Mac, it's not necessarily as bad as it seems when you look at it the first time. You've got all of these issues that we couldn't convert, or maybe it's not possible to convert automatically. But the reality of it is there's lots of duplicates. So you fix it once, and then it's essentially a search and replace, and you fixed it 100 times, for example. So I guess that's why this report is so useful to the DMA team, because we can get an idea of not only the amount of the number of objects that say aren't converted automatically, but really practically what is the work effort to do the conversion.
You're right, John. And we use this information to improve our tools. So when we see some objects where there's a lot of manual effort, we use that feedback to improve our SCT tool. And in the meantime, we streamline our DMA accelerator operations so we can replicate that very rapidly to achieve high-speed migration.
Makes sense. So yeah, that's the database section. I guess moving on, the next part of the analysis is for the application side, right? Because we've got the database. That's like the first part of the thing, and you're thinking about it going, oh, I've got to move my database, but nobody has a database just for the sake of having a database. That database is also used by applications, and there's code base. There's code either inside the schema, but then there's also code outside the schema that applications use to query that database. So what is this app section showing the users, Mac?
So there are two tables here, and the application report, let me explain it at three levels. The first level is at a project level. You'll see the number of files, which is 2,382 files. You will see also the language used here is the Java and SQL in the application code, and some frameworks like JDBC, etc. That's the first level assessment. The next level is how many of those files are touching the database. So there are 125 of such files, and there are 617 SQL statements. So now if you go to the right-hand side, you'll see a breakdown of the SQL, different kinds of SQL statements from select, insert, and so on. So that's the second level of assessment that we do. And then going further deeper, we look at the different Java classes that are there, which have those statements, and what's the complexity of them, from low to complex. And what that tells us is if it's the higher the complexity, the more careful we have to be when we are changing that code. We have to review it more carefully, and it also involves more testing and make sure we don't break anything else.
Makes sense. Makes sense. No, I guess you put all of these pieces together, and the DMA team can really get a good understanding about how much effort it's going to be to do the conversion, and realistically, how much of it's going to happen automatically to make it a very smooth and fluid journey to the cloud?
Yeah, John, that's right.
So when all that's said and done, hopefully, the result that you get is something you like. As mentioned, DMA is very much about a fixed price migration. So, we're going to come up with a number. My guess is it's going to be substantially less than you'd see from almost any other source out there. And then we're going to get into the conversion phases. So this is when the real work begins. But in a way, it's when you can sit back, relax, and let DMA take over and do the work for you. So, Mac, why don't you talk about the steps in refactoring and what it is that your team does?
Yeah. So we have, at a high level, we have an accelerator approach, meaning that we do these assessments upfront, then we create an engineering plan, we share that with the customer, and once the customer accepts it, then we go off and work on it. And it's pretty much hands off from the customer because we want to do it as fast as possible. And in refactoring, we have two parts. We have the database side and we have the application side. And based on that engineering report, we have the certain things that will do automatically, certain things that we do manually. We are building a very sophisticated engineering system with capabilities, machine learning, mathematical optimization based capabilities, so that we can divide this work into a number of people and finish it as fast as possible.
Yeah, it's all about getting it done, but getting it done right. When Mac says get it done as fast as possible, to be perfectly clear, we go through the testing, we run all the validation scripts that are provided. We make sure that it's quality work that gets delivered to you. There's going to be very good work product that gets delivered by DMA. So yeah, talking about quality assurance, let's talk about how we go in and validate that what we've converted is actually giving the required results, Mac.
Yeah. So at the very beginning, we set up the source system in the sandbox environment, which could be, say, Oracle, SQL Server, what have you. And we run the user acceptance test on the source system, and we collect a baseline of results. Then as we start doing conversion work, we are, of course, doing unit tests and functional tests to verify the incremental changes that we are making and making sure that they are working properly. But then we also periodically run the user acceptance tests to ensure that we are passing them also. And at the very end, when we finish the conversion, we once again run those user acceptance tests. And we want to ensure that our results are as good as or better than the baseline that we generated. As John mentioned, quality is of paramount importance. So in case speed is a challenge, we'll never compromise on quality. It may sometimes take us long in case something is more complicated, but we'll always ensure that the target system is working as good as or better than the source system.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, so when we're talking about the deliverables, what is it, Mac, that the customer is going to get? I want to give them a quick overview about the complete DMA offering and the final product that we deliver to them.
Yes, so from an end-to-end perspective, we start off with doing the assessment of the workload and categorize them into 1 through 5. If they're in 1, 2, or 3, then we do conversion of the workload, and we give the following things to the customer. The first is we convert the database itself, the schema and the code. 2, we convert the application code. 3, we also convert the functional tests, the automated tests, and we present a report to the customer on all the changes that we have done. And lastly, we share the results of the user acceptance test and ensure that they pass as good as the baseline that we generated before we started the conversion.
Yeah, it sounds good. Now, I guess with Amazon DMA, we, as you mentioned, we very much handle those category 1 through 2 and 3s, but there's other stuff that you can do with DMA, and that's where DMA Plus comes in. The DMA team will hand you your application and database back in your VPC, working, fully tested and validated. It's there, it's ready, it's good to go. But we do not take it live, for example. So we won't do the absolute final production migration and cutover. We'll have migrated the sample database that you provided to us, and to be perfectly clear, that sample database could be a copy of your production database. But, say there's been transactions happening since that sample was provided, you do still need to do the final production cutover. If you want any post-production support or performance tuning, all of these things are where DMA Plus comes in. So DMA Plus basically either handles components that DMA doesn't cover or migrations that don't qualify for DMA. So if we think back to the start, I was talking about those, or rather Mac was talking about the different categorization levels, category 1, 2, and 3. I mentioned how category 5 was the packaged apps that just you couldn't change. There's this mysterious category 4 that we haven't talked about in any great detail during this session. Those are the very complex applications, lots of dependencies and what have you. This is where DMA Plus comes in. So it's an offering from our professional services team who can really jump in and help you with any of these things that are not covered by DMA, or some really curly things that are just sort of outside the scope, if you will. So the last thing we're going to cover today is what's on the roadmap. And this is maybe a little bit strange because we don't tend to talk a lot about roadmaps in public presentations, but I'll let Mac just give the last few points on it as to what's coming up in the product.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we started with relational workloads, and we want to support analytics workloads. So that's been limited preview in Q3 of this year. And we started with Java and C# based languages and frameworks, and we'll add support for more languages also moving forward in Q3. Our goal is to be able to serve all kinds of workloads that have been built over the last 20, 30 years. And we look forward to supporting you and all of your legacy frameworks and helping you migrate to AWS.
Yeah, no, it's we really think DMA is a great offering, can really help accelerate your migrations. These new options and new features are going to be announced on the AWS Databases blog. So just keep an eye out for it. You'll see announcements appear there throughout the year. But overall, I guess thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully, this was of interest to you. If you have any questions, do feel free to reach out to your account team. They'll either answer them directly or connect you to our team. But yeah, thanks very much for your time. And Mac, you want to do the final sign off?
Thank you once again. Thank you, John, and thank you all of you. It's been great sharing about DMA with you. Look forward to understanding if you have any questions or if we can help you with anything.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And feel free to post any questions in the chat that you haven't done so far. And yeah, look forward to hearing from you.